Hello again, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Today I'm talking to Roy Huntington as we barely scratch the surface, pun intended, about gun finishes. Everything from bluing to the latest Miracle Aerospace product. But before we get into our discussion, here's a quick word from our great sponsor, preparedness.com. Prepare for those just-in-case situations with emergency food kits from 4 Patriots. Their survival food kits combine great taste with long shelf life, making them perfect to stash away for any emergency situation. The folks at 4 Patriots set up a special page just for our audience, so you can get this week's special discounts and deals. That page is 4patriots.com/gunmag. Again, just go to 4patriots.com/gunmag for all the special discounts and deals. Hey there, Roy. Thanks for joining us yet again for the Guns Magazine podcast. We love having you, and haven't even scratched the surface of everything you know, so we'll just keep having you back until we drain your brain completely dry.
No one will even know, huh?
Yeah. You're the guy that's forgotten more than I'll probably ever know, so that's why it's wonderful to have you on the episodes, and the audience loves it, so again, thanks. Well, today we're going to talk about the Big Kid's Guide to Gun Finishes, and we were kind of talking about our topic for this episode, and it started out we were talking about Cerakoting and this and that, and then we finally decided let's just talk about gun finishes because there is so much stuff out there. And honestly, this episode could be 5 hours long if we wanted to do a semi-deep dive, but there's so much misinformation about gun finishes. Let's at least talk about what we know, what we've seen. And of course, while we were talking about this, Roy said, well, yeah, I've had hot bluing tanks. I'm like, of course you have, Roy. They're one of the most toxic things in the entire world, but we'll listen to your experiences doing bluing. But anyway, provided you didn't just fall off the turnip truck, you understand that most guns, or at least used to, came with a blued finish, and it ranged from almost black blue to a lighter blue, and then there was color case hardening, and there was plum browning, and there's been all kinds of stuff. But let's start this big dive into gun finishes with bluing. Roy, what exactly is bluing, and why do we even have it on guns?
Oh, it's rust, what it is. Yeah,
rust never sleeps.
Rust never sleeps, and I don't think we need to get into the chemical breakdown of it all, but basically is your gun rusts, and then through the miracle of modern day science, it makes this sort of black, dark, I guess, oxide finish. And I think initially they did it because there really was no other option in the olden days. I mean, in the olden days, you had if you see flintlocks, a lot of those were left in the white. That means there was no finish on them. And so it was up to the soldiers to keep them well oiled and clean. And they used to use pumice abrasive powder to, get the rust off. And so then the like Kentucky rifles, you saw a lot of browning because that was a technique that they knew they could do. It didn't require a lot of high heat, and they had simple to find chemicals that they were accessible to. And so as time went on, then bluing became an option. And I think initially it was bluing because it's pretty. I mean, it certainly is. It's really not that good of a finish to resist corrosion or rust or, even wear. But it certainly beats raw steel, especially if you keep it oiled. And
exactly.
But I think part of the reason, though, is that we've transitioned from that is because of the convenience and in many cases, the durability of things like, NP3 plus and hard chrome and electroless nickel and stuff like that. But I think a lot of shooters really don't understand about bluing, and so maybe we should talk about that for a few minutes.
Well, I was going to say, trying to distill this down to the important thing to the average shooter. We all tinker with our guns. Some to good effect, others to not so good effect. But I think the big thing is talk about hot bluing versus cold bluing versus touch-up pins versus miracle in a bottle bluing, because in my experiences over the years, the stuff you can do yourself just isn't as good as the factory. And the factory, the process of bluing is incredibly toxic, and they use hot water and big tanks and blah blah blah. But speaking as a guy who's owned tanks, go from there, Roy, because that's reached the end of my knowledge.
Well, it's actually, you really outlined it really well, because if you have a piece of bare metal in your hand now and you want to make it blued, you do have a lot of options. And I think it's a bit like a pocket tool. So all the cold bluing options, while they sort of kind of get the job done, they're like a pocket tool in the sense, but they're not really the right tool to do the job. And they're, you can buy, Birchwood Casey makes these really handy kits. Everything you need to blue a gun in this kit. Well, first of all, I like Birchwood Casey. I use their products all the time, but that's not everything you need in that kit.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll get you started and you'll make a huge mess, and then you'll wonder why you did it, but you'll learn a lot. And so then the next time you'll know how to apply better. But you're right. Let's say you have a worn bluing on your sights. They make a marking pen. It's not really bluing, and so sometimes it is actually like a Sharpie pen. I use a Sharpie pen sometimes, and So, but there are different cold bluing solutions. Dozens of them actually, and some of them are more effective than other ones. Brownell sells 4 or 5 different bluing solutions. Now, all of them I found, if you have a gun and you want to do touch-up bluing, first you have to jump onto YouTube and you'll find somebody that looks like me or you and walking you through the process. But keep in mind that you really have to be talented to get the kind of finish that you would expect from a hot blue. And it's not just the chemicals involved. Its surface preparation is at least as important, if not more important. And so,
Yep.
But if you've got a gun that's worn around by the muzzle a little bit, maybe the cylinder a little bit, and the backstrap a little bit, well, then learn how to prep the surface. If you've got a high polished blue gun, you're not going to be able to match it perfectly. Everyone's going to know that you've got touch-up blue on the gun. But if you do it right, you can learn to blend a little bit. It actually is I call it sort of either a temporary fix or a workman-like fix, meaning if it's a field gun, it's going to get blue worn again. So really, who cares?
Yeah.
And that's why God invented Cerakote, for a gun like that. But the one thing to remember if you want to try a cold bluing is that really they work better if you hot blue it. What I mean by that is that prepare the surface. How the surface looks before you put the cold bluing on is how it's going to look afterwards. So if you have a rust pitted surface, you're going to still see the rust pits, right? If you have a matte finish surface, let's say use 220 grit paper, well, then you're going to have a matte finish blue. And if you want that, deep, high polish, lose yourself in blue from an old Colt Python or something like that, well, you need to be able to create a flawless surface finish that's polished to a high level degree before it gets put in the hot blue tank or before you apply the cold blue. And so just don't expect the world, because you're not going to get it with what you're doing. But if you heat it up, like kind of too hot to touch with a hot air gun, and then apply the cold bluing, you'll find that almost always works better that way.
Yeah. And I think you made an important point there, the workman-like comment. If you've got a field gun and it's got some sentimental value, or, for whatever reason you want to look nice, nothing wrong with it. But if you've got that Python, that might be the time to just bite the bullet and have it done professionally by somebody that's got all the equipment and got the experience. It's that old thing of, when I had my knee replaced, I went to a guy that does it every day versus the guy that does it once a year. So it's kind of same thing with gun bluing. If you've got a valuable gun or a show gun, an expensive gun, it might be better off just to send it to the professionals. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And, there's a reason why, while bluing isn't as popular as it was, there still are shops that do excellent jobs. I mean, actually, oddly enough, I saw a Python not too long ago that was done recently, and it absolutely looked like a pre-war Colt. It was the most beautiful job I have ever seen in my life. and it's 90% surface prep. So they knew how to polish it, they knew how to keep the edges sharp, they knew how not to dish out the screw holes. All that stuff is so important, and that's where the talent is. If you go to Turnbull Restoration's website, they have a really good series of pictures of them, their craftsmen in doing restoration, and you'll see it's all hand work, and it's all 220, 400, 600, 800 grit paper and little pieces of wood to hold it flat, and rounded shapes to fit in cylinder flutes. And so it's an amazing talent that they have, and that those are the guys that really know how to do it. And but so if you're just going to go, buy a Formula 44 bluing, buy a Brownell's, one of their bluing solutions, and degrease your gun with some alcohol, get out some of the surface mess on it, smear the bluing on, you're going to go, oh my God, what have I done? And then you wipe it with 400 grit steel wool a couple times and reapply it. And after 4 or 5 times, you'll say, well, actually, that doesn't look half bad,
Yep.
But don't try to re-blue your grandpa's collectible double shotgun the first time around. But now hot bluing, I think a lot of people don't really understand what goes on there. And again, not getting into the technical side of it, a bluing kit, say from Brownells, is going to run you $3,000, give or take a little bit, and that depending on what you want. So that's a long special stainless steel tank, the burners for that, hoses, chemicals, everything you need. And it's something you really have to do outside unless you've got pretty serious, ventilation system, because as you said, this stuff will really get you. And so basically the process is that you heat up the bluing solution, which you have to mix, and rubber apron, face shield, rubber gloves, the whole deal. And so, that's the reason why it costs $350 or $400 or $500 to blue a gun. And because you've got a huge amount of time in the preparation, and then the actual bluing, you figure all these parts have to be suspended on wires and holders and things like that. They have little baskets so you can put the screws and pins and little things like that. And so then you boil the metal and make sure it's in a degreaser to get decreased. Then it gets put into the bluing tank for a certain amount of time. Then it gets taken out. Then it gets in a neutralizing solution. And so even at that point, sometimes it requires more polish, and then you repeat that. And so it's almost like Merlin the magician. And it's true. It is definitely more art than science.
Yeah, and that's a good explanation why you can't expect, your miracle product in the bottle that you wipe it on with a cotton swab and it doesn't look the same. Well, it's not the same. So just as long as you understand the difference. And one interesting point, if you've got an old double barrel shotgun, hot bluing is not really an option, because many of those were put together with solder holding the barrel, that it comes close to the melting point of the process they use for hot bluing. So that's just a little tip there. But speaking of old guns, I've heard many explanations, and I think I understand, but why do a lot of old guns actually look more brown, even though they came from the factory, as blue?
Well, it's patina, and it's because the bluing, and it's either sheer age or it's a lack of care. Because I've seen 1860s, 1850s Colts that look as blue and as pristine as the day they came from the factory. And that's because they've been maintained correctly, and they've had oil, and they've been in a dry environment, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you see other guns, that are all the way from a rusted Hulk to, as you say, there's just that patina on them. And so what that is it's actually rust. And because bluing is actually rust, as we said, and so it will allow more rust to occur. And so, I think some guns are kind of handsome. You look at some of these old Colt single actions, from the turn of the century and stuff, and they've got that kind of patina on them, and that looks really cool. And something people forget all the time, though, and I always laugh about it, is because like cowboy action shooters, a lot of those guys, they want to be this, really, grungy guy, a cowboy, a cattle, rustler, and stuff like that. And when you look, they've always got these old, blue worn Colt with patina on them and all that kind of stuff. Well, but people forget, if it's 1875 and you're a cowboy and you have a single action Colt, well, it's 2 years old, and
Exactly.
yeah, and so they forget that those guns looked new in those
Yeah.
days. Yeah.
Yep.
And so when you look at the old westerns from the 50s, everybody there has like really shiny, nice looking guns. That's because they did.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun.
Exactly.
So bluing. I think bluing is appropriate for a lot of guns. Like you say, family heirlooms. If you need a classic gun reblued, for instance, send it to somebody like Turnbull Restorations. Let it get done correctly, and I promise you will love it to death. You have to take care of it. So, but if you need something a little more within your grasp, maybe within your price range, there are some other options there. So.
I was going to say, nowadays we've got all these miracle finishes, and part of the reason you're seeing they're better in terms of standing up against wear, so that's a huge plus to the shooter. It's also better for the factory because you don't have to prep the metal quite as pretty as you do to get that nice blue job. But in between modern day synthetic coatings and the original blued coatings, there was nickel plating and some of those kind of things. Back when I started shooting, nickel was kind of nickel and Parkerizing, and we'll talk about Parkerizing in a minute. But talk about some of those coatings.
Well, you're right. They had nickel back, well before the turn of the century. I mean, in 1873 Colts, you could get them nickel plated. And in those days, they did it not so much for looks, but primarily because it was truly more resistant to rust and abuse than bluing was. Of course, over the years, you see the patina these old Colt, nickeled guns get, and people think that's how they were, but no, they look beautiful when they were new. Nickel is still really popular. There's still companies who do high polished nickel. And I have to say, boy, if you've got a Model 29 that was nickeled from the factory, it's something to behold. I have one and they're just beautiful. And if you take them out and show them to somebody, they can't imagine this is really a gun. And so, yeah, but that's really not something you can do at home. Like that kind of hot bluing, that kind of nickel plating, even anodizing aluminum, which has been around for a long time. Even that's, yes, you can do it at home, but you've got to really be committed and really learn about it. And Parkerizing, I think, you said that, and it's a really good option. I used to Parkerize guns a lot. A lot of my own guns are Parkerized because it's actually really doable for the average schmo. And you could buy Parkerizing solution from companies online like Brownells and Midway and whatnot. And it's really simple. I actually bought some stainless steel containers from a restaurant supply place, used, like from your salad bar, those old stainless steel things. And you can do it in the kitchen, just, as long as your wife isn't mad at you, because it's not real stinky or anything. And so basically you mix a solution, I think it's 5 or 6% Parkerizing, and you heat the water to about 180 degrees. And then you put a little bit of metal filings, like you file on a piece of steel and put that in. That kind of kicks the solution to start. And then you suspend your parts in the solution. And it usually takes about 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes or 10 minutes, and it bubbles like a fizzy. Remember fizzies or Alka-Seltzer?
Oh, yeah.
It does that. And so what it does is it leaches the metal off of the gun into the tank, and then it redeposits it along with the solution. And so it doesn't penetrate the surface. So this is microscopic. The only hitch for the average person is you have to sandblast the parts. You have to bead blast them or you have to sandblast them. So you have to have access to that. Now you could go to Harbor Freight and buy a $50 sandblaster and do it out on your garage or out in the front if you wanted to, and that would work fine. But you can do it. So then when you're done, you take it out. Parkerizing is soft when you first get it out of the tank, and so you rinse it really good in hot water, uber super duper hot water. Scrub it with a real soft brush, and then let it dry. Then once it's dry, and this is the magic of Parkerizing, because I think a lot of people think parkerizing is what prevents the corrosion and the rust. And actually, it's not at all. If you parkerize this gun and then set it outside tomorrow, it'll be rusty. Trust me, I've tried it and it rusts, right? But what it does do is parkerizing is actually like a microscopic sponge-like finish on your gun, which holds oil. And so that's why the military likes it. As you said, it's cheap. It doesn't wear particularly well. It'll wear off on the sharp edges and stuff like that, but it holds oil like son of a gun. And so that's why when you parkerize the gun and they put cosmoline on it, you put it away and you got it out 500 years later, it would look exactly the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I sent away and had a Model 19 done. I bought it years ago. Actually, it was my first handgun, and it was ugly. That's how I could afford it. But mechanically, it was fine. And I had a buddy that was a pistol armorer go through it, and everything was mechanically fine. It just hadn't really been taken care of on the exterior, and parkerizing was the cheapest thing I could do, and it came back. It looked pretty good. So that was a fave gun, and I sold it, and that was, why did I ever do that? But that was late 80s, and that was the period, parkerizing had been around since, I think, World War I, really got used a lot post-World War I. But about the time that I was having that gun parkerized, that's when the miracle finishes were starting to come out. And we'll talk, and it can be anything from some of these paint-like coatings, Cerakote, some of those things, all the way up to some of these really exotic things, which have kind of paralleled it, but we'll get there in a moment. But let's talk about something that I've actually done, and I've had friends do, and they come out pretty good, and that's the Cerakote type finishes that, the rattle can finishes. Most of them, you clean and prep your part, you spray it on, hopefully not getting any runs, drips, and dabs, and then you heat them in the oven, preferably not your wife's oven with the windows closed.
Yeah.
Let me just repeat that. And wear pretty good. They're not indestructible like they used to. I remember, you could throw this gun in a blast furnace and the only thing left will be the Cerakote. Well, it's not quite that good, but it's a pretty good finish. And of course, it comes in every color under the sun now. But anyway, Roy, you've got a great shop near you that we went and visited. That they got a Cerakote guy, does great work. But talk about your experiences with it.
Well, that's a really good point, because a lot of people, they hear the term Cerakote, they see guns that are Cerakoted, they understand what's going on, but there are misconceptions about it. And so before Cerakote, there were spray-on finishes and spray-on bake-on finishes. And I used to use them a lot just for, hey, you restored this old beat-up 870 or something like that. But I think what people don't really understand is it's like they're paint, basically. I mean, they're a pre-mixed, sometimes it's a acrylic based stuff, sometimes it's like a epoxy based stuff. It depends on what the maker is, and depending on the manufacturer, they can withstand different things. But generally, if you buy one of the kits, like I want to make my flat dark earth pump action shotgun, you can buy a spray can of it. You have to prep the surface. There's instructions on how to do it, and then spray it on. And it's like, as you said, it's like spraying a rattle can. And then some of them are self-curing. You don't have to heat them. Some of them, they do want you to bake them. Some of them, you have that option. You can bake it to make it a little bit harder. But they never will wear like hard chrome or MP3 plus or the nitrides and stuff like that, because these literally are surface painting something on, and there are various degrees of hardness. And something that a lot of people don't think about when they do that is that Cerakote is only a couple thousandths thick. It's really thin. If you Cerakote a gun that's got rust pits on it, you're going to see all the rust pits. If you've got pinholes, you're going to see the pinholes. And so Cerakote's pretty good. Having said that, if you use one of the old spray coats, you are going to have a big job ahead of you getting the gun back together again. Because if you've spray coated any of the contact points in the gun, like, you do not want to do the action. Sorry, do not, nothing on the inside of the gun. But if you do a 1911, for instance, well, you're going to have to make sure that all the frame rails are clean, you're going to have to scrape it off all the bodies of all the pins, because trust me, it's not going to go together. Because I have to do that even with Cerakoting. When I get a gun back from the Cerakoter, I mean, it takes me 2-3 hours at least to assemble a gun. Like your Wrangler, after I got it back from the Cerakoter, it was a 2 or 3 hour job, to get them back together, because you have to clear all of the surfaces. But once it's done, Cerakote, I've seen the test that if you have a surface finish of Cerakote, for instance, that there's no edges visible, well, you can pretty much put it in a salt tank for the next 5 years, and nothing's going to happen. But unfortunately, about those finishes, as you know, it's if it gets a scratch on it or something, well, that's the cancer, and that allows the bad stuff in.
Yep. And Cerakote or any of these finishes and Kydex don't like each other, because you will get dirt on your gun. And I believe, trying to think, we're getting ready to do a story on it. There was a bunch of 1911s that Marine Special Operations had got from, I forget who. My memory's failing at this point, but they ended up having to take them back for the only reason was the Cerakote was wearing. It was because obviously they're doing a lot of presentations and practice, and you put a little sand in there and the finish is going to come off. So they stood behind their warranty. But just realize that, you can have a really dead sexy two-tone scorched earth, camo or whatever, but if you're carrying it in Kydex, it'll probably get all chewed up after a while if you use your gun like you should. So,
yeah, I think the key here is that if any of the spray-on coatings, you have to expect that it's going to wear. And so you're going to get muzzle wear, you're going to get nicks and scratches and stuff like that. You just have to you can't look at it and try to keep it pristine. It's not going to stay pristine. It's something you said, a very good point, because people forget leather holsters are actually the same way. That I don't have lined leather holsters because usually the soft suede lining will really want to hold the grit, whereas if it's regular leather on the inside, you can actually get it and wipe it out. I have a 1873 Colt that was made in 1875, and it really is battle worn. It's got a patina on it like you can't believe. It was actually found in Arizona underneath a settler's cabin. It was wrapped in an oilcloth, and so who knows when it was put there. I had to have it restored well enough that it would function, but it's pitted and everything else. But what amazes me about it is that if you look at the muzzle, straight on, the inside edge of the muzzle and the outside edge of the muzzle, they're actually tapered slightly. They're worn, so they're thinner. And it's because it's been in and out of the holster in the West, in Arizona, where the sand is everywhere. So, the holsters are impregnated with it. But it had ridden in there on a horse, bouncing up and down and everything. And it basically sanded the muzzle down enough that you could actually see. So,
how cool.
Yeah.
Well, while we're also talking about these kind of paint-like coatings, one that really kills me is the water dip that you see, guys. I've seen it, from the factory, all kinds of camo patterns and all that, and that's what a lot of those are, is the water dip. But I've watched a lot of guys do it at home, and I can't say that I've seen too many home jobs that really looked all that great. So that's one of those that, sure, knock yourself out if you want to try it, but I'd leave that one to the professionals. But have you tried it? Have you had better luck?
Absolutely. I've been at the factories where they do it, and they really know what they're doing, and it's not inexpensive. There's a guy in town here, and he's got just the tank was $5,000.
Wow.
So yeah, the little kit you take home and you pour in your dealie, and you put the gun underneath it and lift it up through and everything. Do it because it's fun to do all that kind of stuff. But I think before we move on to anything else, if we're going to talk about other finishes, I would like to encourage people, though. It's like if you've got a hunting rifle and you wish you had a camouflage stock on it, well, then go to Home Depot and buy, a darker tinted olive green and a, harvest gold or something like that, and go out in your yard and get some different leaves maybe some grass and stuff like that. And so you paint your stock a base color, and then you lay this on it, and you kind of paint around it a little bit, and then you lay something over here and you paint around, and you lay something over there and you paint around, and pretty soon you're going to have a kind of an interesting, cool camouflage stock, and you did it yourself. Yeah,
Yep.
So
I've done a lot of guns like that, and what I use is that removable tape.
Good idea.
Darken up the barrel and the action. And I will say, though, when they say it's removable, they don't mean 2 or 3 years later. I'm just saying.
It's true. I know just what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a good, I think I've got some guns in the locker right now, just like that. Just relatively inexpensive guns, and mainly for a hobby project is gussy up the stock, with some rattle cans and try to do a real nice job. And then I didn't want to tackle refinishing the barrel and the action, so just some of that tape does a pretty nice job, especially like on turkey shotguns and things like that. So, okay, now the big moment. We're going to talk about the exotic NASA-derived nuclear physicist extreme coatings. And, there's a number of these. I know a lot of them, well, some of them were even actually designed for like automotive or the oil industry to protect equipment from wear, and they've made their way. I believe that's how Robar actually got started, wasn't it?
Yeah, actually, Robbie bought the rights to MP3 years ago, and that's what started finishing technologies, so or coating technologies, and so he's still going strong, with that. But I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets here. But he didn't start out doing guns, and now MP3 is, I think it's one of the electroless nickels type finishes. It's not exactly, but it has different wear abilities. You can go a sharp edge with it and it won't peel off. And it's also has a natural lubrication to it. As a matter of fact, if you get an MP3 gun, it's kind of hard to run the slide because your hand wants to kind of slip on it. It is truly kind of a miracle product. But he was doing it for the aerospace industry and helicopter parts and, the space station and motorcycle parts and stuff like that. So you get wear resistance and corrosion resistance, and it is truly a miracle. But he said when he was getting calls from engineers at factories saying, "Hey, what's that finish again? I mean, is that something I could do on a gun?" And that's when Robbie, being the entrepreneur that he is, he went, "Yes." And so that's how Robar started. And he said basically he kept that going for the longest time, just to interest engineers in all the different industries who are often shooters. And so they immediately saw that connection between this new miracle coating and, hey, I can use that on my gun, Yep. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, and these really are miracle coatings. They check pretty much all the boxes, other than kids, don't try this at home. It's proprietary. And I've sat through a couple of conversations with different guys, including Robbie, that explain how this works. And about a minute in, you're going, okay, yeah, don't even think about it. Send it away and get it done by a professional.
I'm aware there's one of the mainstream gun companies. They have this new coating technology, and it's essentially as hard as diamond. And I mean, you can't scratch it with a knife blade at all. And the first time I saw it, they handed it to me and they went, "Here, look." And I thought, "Oh, that's very nice. It looks like real black bluing, And I thought, "Whoa, that's really pretty. What is that?" And he said, "Well, try to scratch it." And so I thought, well, this is going to scratch easy, right? I got my pocket knife and my blade just slid over it. And I went, well, no, I mean, I'm going to be able to scratch this. And then when I realized that the edge of my blade was kind of curling a little bit from my pressure, and I went, holy cow, what is this?
Yeah.
So I can't give away any secrets, but suffice to say that the machine to apply it is $500,000.
Wow.
I know. And so when you buy one of those guns and you see the bolt on your rifle is coated with that, it's not something you spray in the kitchen and put in the oven.
Exactly. Well, we're running out of time, but there's one last thing I want to talk about because it's one of my favorites. It's really the favorite of traditionalists, and that is case hardening. And there's a lot of misconceptions about case hardening. True, real deal case hardening is basically a surface kind of treatment that comes from basically tempering the part in charcoal, and there's quenching, and it is more of an art than a science per se. But there's also some almost look-alike kind of things, but there's a lot of misconceptions about color case hardened. So, Roy, I know you've got a little more info than that. So, color case hardening.
You can buy a kit from Birchwood Casey, and it's like a copycat color case hardening, but it's chemical. And so you heat up the surface like a receiver of a Model 94 Winchester or something like that, a single shot H&R. I did one with a single shot H&R break open gun. And so by heating it and applying this chemical in different ways, you end up with some multicolored that to the uninitiated would kind of look like color case hardening. It's not. And it's on the surface and it will wear off relatively easily, but it's pretty and, it's fun to do and there's nothing wrong with that. So
yep.
Doug Turnbull's claim to fame basically is that, 30 years ago, his family basically rediscovered and then built on the way to color case harden the way like the early Winchesters were done and,
yep.
That beautiful, you could climb inside of it kind of stuff. And that's what got Doug Turnbull going, basically. And then he also, of course, they reinvented rust bluing, which is that beautiful blue, we used to remember from pre-war Colt guns and stuff like that. And so, real case hardening, because you can color case, and that's real surface, but real case hardening, which penetrates the metal more. But yeah, you're right. You have to heat the metal up to an undisclosed amount. You pack it in carbon. They used to use hooves from cows and stuff like that. And then you heat it again, and then you have to take it out and quench it in a certain way. And the challenge, though, has been that if you do a receiver, it'll often warp the receiver a little bit. It tends to want to warp and bend the parts. That's why you don't usually see color case hardened knife blades, because they'll,
yep.
they'll be like that. Turnbull is able to do their magic to where they're able to do things like that. And so that's why you've seen Smith & Wesson revolvers that are color case hardened by Turnbull, and 1911s with frames and slides case hardened. So that is a miracle stuff. Can I talk about hard chrome?
Sure.
Hard chrome is late 70s or late 60s, really early 70s. It was the first sort of miracle finish, and it came from the aerospace industry. Rohr Corporation, I think, was using it on airplane parts and stuff like that. And it's the same thing. The engineers went, "Well, I really like that. I'll bet you that'd really be good on a gun." And so I had a friend who used to do hard chrome, and he worked at Rohr. And so he would actually prep all the guns and then take them in. And when they were doing hard chroming for, aerospace brackets and stuff, he would do the guns at the same time. And it just exploded. It caught on because it's pretty much rust proof. I mean, I think a long enough saltwater bath, it'll eventually rust. And it's wear resistant. And it's a really handsome, if you don't know what hard chrome looks like, Google it and, gun hard chromes, and you'll see it's this, real serious looking kind of matte gray, finish. And I had it on my duty guns, and I still have guns that are hard chromed. And it's a real good compromise between the really expensive uber high end stuff and the spray on finishes and stuff like that. So basically, for let's say less than $300, you could get your gun hard chromed. There's still companies who do it. And I think you'd be very happy with it. It's a handsome finish. It's durable, and it's easy to clean. So hard chrome, option B.
Very cool. Well, truly, I think the big takeaway here is, first of all, almost all the finishes are not perfect. Some of them are very, very close, but none of them are perfect. And anything you can do at home, it's going to go bad at some point without a lot of care. And don't do it to a gun has great value, or especially as is, because it's one of those things. I've seen so many really bad refinish jobs on the metal, and we both had that, Roy. Somebody, they're so proud, I've refinished this, and you go, oh,
yes, you did.
Yes, you did. Yeah. Especially the water dips. I've That was a big fad about 10 years ago. And
yeah,
I know a couple of guys, and it's like, well, that's interesting. So knock yourself out, have fun, do it, but be realistic about your skills. You with your rattle can is not going to equal, a factory that's got 100 years of experience and guys that do it every day 1,000 times a day. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, we've gone long on this episode because there was a lot to talk about. We'll do a part 2. We'll do the ultimate guide to stock finishes because, oh my goodness, there's a bunch of stuff out there too. So ranging from simple varnish to some stuff that you can pretty much take a blowtorch to. So we'll do a follow-up to this. I don't know if it'll be next week, but we will do it very soon. So Roy, as always, you're the only guy I know that actually had hot bluing tanks. It doesn't surprise me at all. Maybe one of these days we can talk about how you used to smelt your own ore. So
damn, you found out about that.
Exactly. Well, hey, again, thanks for joining us on the Guns Magazine podcast.
My pleasure.
It was great talking to Roy Huntington about gun finishes, and yeah, we just barely scratched the surface. Sorry, it's a pun that was sitting there and we had to use it. Before we go, I'd like to remind you, please check out our great sponsor, forpatriots.com. You can find out more about their food kits and other preparedness supplies at forpatriots.com/gunmag. That's where you'll get this week's special deals and discounts just for the Guns Magazine podcast audience. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works so hard here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you, now get out there and get shooting.